The space race is over, and I'll never get to the moon. By Schistosity. Read by My Lost and Found. Chapter 4. Pathfinder. Keith was 17 when he left the Garrison, and, while his accidentally acquired cool guy persona would never let him admit it, it was one of the worst days of his life. He remembered the shame and anger he felt when they looked him in the eye and told him to leave. Kicked out, dropped out. They didn't care how he left, just that he was gone. It burned him to his core. It made him want to scream. But his pride stopped him, and he left silently. He waited until he was on the flight from Phoenix to Houston, buckled into seat 17A with the seat backs fully upright, cruising at 3,500 feet, to start crying. It wasn't every day all your dreams were shattered right in front of you. He spent a few weeks crashing on the couches of a couple of Shiro's friends from Caltech. They were NASA employees, mostly, who had ended up in desk jobs at the JSC, while Shiro had taken the route his military background had provided. "What are you gonna do?" one of them asked over breakfast one day. He was a wiry-looking aerospace engineer named Harvey. "You're college age, right? Are you thinking about UH?" Keith shrugged noncommittally. He hadn't thought about UH. He hadn't thought about anything. He was a prodigy geared for the Garrison pilot program. Maybe he'd have gone to Caltech after graduating, like Shiro had. And then he'd have piloted a ship, like Shiro had. There was no possible future Keith had ever imagined for himself where he didn't go into space, where he wasn't a pilot. For as long as he could remember, Keith wanted to go to space. The desire to be up there, exploring the stars, was a blessed point of consistency in his wild and hectic life. No matter what happened to him over the years, he always knew where he was heading. But not anymore. On his second last day in Texas, Keith went to the Johnson Space Center and took the visitors tour. It was a Wednesday, so the tour group was pretty sparse, but the guide was still very eager. As they walked past the old shuttles and rockets, she told them their stories in flourishing, spectacular fashion. Keith knew all their stories, though. He had taken this tour probably a dozen times in his life. He had grown up steeped in culture of this place, and he refused to believe it could take so much from him. The tour finished, and they were all given posters, each emblazoned with a quote from a speech Keith was more familiar with, JFK's address to promote the Apollo program. "We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard." And when he felt himself draw back to the desert, when he got on the plane to Phoenix a day later, it was those words he kept in his mind. He was going to fix things, going to figure things out, all without the Garrison. Because everyone told him he couldn't. Because it was hard. Being on the receiving end of Allura's fury was almost worse than the experience of crashing a ship holding a $900 million space probe through the ceiling of a museum. Almost. "Okay, we'll admit we were being a little reckless, but a little?" Allura snapped, cutting Hunk's half-baked excuse in two. "You four jeopardized our entire alliance with the Orions, and for what? A piece of old Earth technology?" "It's not just that," Lance said. "Besides, we weren't going to steal it. We were just going to download all of its internal data." It's hard to explain their reasoning to her. It was hard for Keith to even justify it to himself. Sure, there was the strategic value of Revelation possibly containing information about the whereabouts of Samuel Holt, but that wasn't super high on Keith's personal priority list. So why had he been so quick to care? When he had received that call from Hunk, he had immediately agreed. Yeah, it was a good idea to get the probe's data legally, because the mere thought of there being a NASA probe on an alien planet this far away was weird and wild and cool. It was this kind of thing Keith had always dreamt about when he was younger, to be an astronaut, representing Earth and exploring the farthest cosmos. Never had he expected to see something from Earth in a place like this in his lifetime. But here it was, breaking new ground with them in tow. That was a hard sentiment to sell to Allura and Karan, who had both known this life for as long as they'd been alive. Alteans had been space travelers for generations before Allura's time, so it wasn't anything new. To see what they saw every day, not like how it was new to them. But however hard it was to convince the Alteans, it was incredibly easy to convince the Urions. They had even given them Revelation as a thanks for stopping the robbery, and in honor of returning such a beautiful relic to its people. Now Revelation was lying haphazardly in the middle of the training deck, pieces of it delicately put to the side, loosened panels encircling it like a halo. The bad news was that the probe had been severely damaged even before the Urions had found it, and Keith had stabbed it. Its body was dented and concave on its left side, and there were dangerous bits of loose wiring on the underside. Pidge and Hunk enlisted Karan to help them make structural repairs, but they also insisted he help them insert new Altean pieces of technology into its systems. On the third day of repairs, Keith sat with Pidge, Hunk, and Lance on the training room floor. They had been chatting about normal, boring stuff, but the presence of Revelation had eventually shifted their conversation to something more somber.
You know what I miss? I miss the stars I recognize.
Hunk stopped working on the probe.
Constellations and stuff. My mom taught me them.
He ran a hand over the NASA insignia on Revelation's body, finger tracing the pinprick white stars like he was connecting them.
The longer we're out here, the more I think I'll forget them.
I miss the sun, Pidge said. I know we see a lot of suns, but I miss sunny days. Our sunny days. It never feels the same out here.
I miss the rain.
Lance's voice was quiet but disarming. They all fell silent. Do you think they miss us? Pidge said finally.
Of course they miss us,
Lance said with a forcefulness that betrayed the tears in his eyes.
You know what I miss?
Keith felt the sudden, urgent need to divert the conversation to something lighter.
I miss Iverson.
Apparently, that was all what they needed to break the tension. Hunk snorted so loud he almost choked, and Pidge began to giggle uncontrollably.
God,
Lance wheezed, wiping his eyes with his sleeve.
I fucking miss Iverson. Keith, Pidge called, can you do me a favor? Can you run to my room and pick up a bag of tools I left there?
Keith nodded and stood up. As he'd left, he turned Pidge's question over in his head, heading down hall after hall until he reached his destination. Not Pidge's room, but Shiro's.
Whoa, what's up?
Shiro asked as Keith opened his door.
Can I talk to you about something?
A minute later, they were standing on the bridge, watching Aurea fade into the distance. It was beautiful, and from this far away, it kind of looked like Earth.
Do you think they miss us?
Keith said after a moment.
Who?
Shiro asked.
The Urions? I'm not quite sure the impression we made was strong enough to warrant missing us.
No,
I mean, back home,
Keith clarified, though he got the feeling Shiro knew what he was talking about.
On Earth. Do you think they miss us?
And then, more quietly,
do you even think they know I'm gone? Does that matter to you?
Shiro asked.
Does it matter to you? You're alive, but no one had the chance to know that. The Garrison wouldn't have told your family you came back. I bet good money on that. No one is thinking of you. I don't think this is about me, Keith,
Shiro said.
Can you tell me what's actually bothering you?
And to Keith's surprise, he actually did.
I'm out here like I always wanted to be. I'm exploring the universe. I'm piloting again. You weren't there when I wasn't piloting, but trust me, it sucked. I should be happy, but I'm not. I'm living my dream, but it doesn't feel like it at all.
Shiro let him keep going.
Lance and Pidge and Hunk and you all have reasons to want to go back. But me? I was already distant. I didn't have anyone. So why do I miss it so much? Because it's home, Keith, Shiro said. Frankly, I'd be worried if you weren't a little homesick. Keith thought about the question from before. What did he miss from Earth? He missed the desert and the views he'd get from it. The stars were always so clear there. He missed Houston, too, weirdly. He missed the food trucks he sometimes went to, and he missed going to movies. He missed the blue skies and the southern heat. Sometimes our dreams realize themselves in ways we didn't expect. That's just the way life is, Shiro said. Maybe you're not making the exact impact you wanted to, but why don't you think about it this way? When we get back to Earth, when, not if, people are going to know about what you did, what you went through, how you protected them. That's a good dream to have, right? Seeing the change you've made. Thank you, Keith mumbled. No, thank you for coming to me about this, Shiro said. Keith smiled. No problem, but you're not going to share your tragic astronaut origin story, too. Shiro winked. Nah, you're going to have to wait until at least season 5 for that. Fuck off, Keith laughed. What does that even mean? I'm leaving. When Keith returned to the training deck with the tools, Lance, Hunk, and Pidge were in the middle of a very different conversation than the one he'd left them on. Yeah, I said Power Rangers, Lance was saying. Listen, as much as you don't want to admit it, Pidge, Voltron is literally Megazord, and that's a fact. What are we talking about? Keith asked Hunk, sitting down on the floor near them. What sci-fi shows are most comparable to our current situation? Hunk replied. They've been arguing for a while. It's even the same color as Pidge. I don't see how you... Ouch! Pidge had tossed the wrench at Lance, hitting his kneecap far too hard to be healthy. Don't ruin Voltron for me, Lance. What about Stargate? Keith said, trying to quash a laugh. Did you ever see that? What kind of question is that? Have I ever seen Stargate? Lance grimaced, rubbing his knee. You think I signed my ass up for space school and haven't seen Stargate? He grinned. How come you know so much about nerd stuff, Keith? Are you, perhaps, a nerd? Keith knew he didn't give off the visual vibe of being someone who had watched 37 straight hours of Star Trek: The Next Generation on the couch in a shack. Living in the desert alone got pretty boring sometimes. So he wasn't super offended by Lance's read of him. All he said was, I guess. Okay, guys, pause that for a sec. I think I have it. Pidge grunted as she tugged the probe's backing. Hunk held it steady. Just one more. Ouch! The warped panel flew off in Pidge's hands, revealing the interior wiring like the innards of some strange beast. All 4 of them crawled over to peer inside, and they were met by a flash of light as sparks flew from the inside of the probe. All of them reeled backwards, like they had been hit by a bright camera flash. What was that? Sparking? Aw, those assholes were right. It's junk. There was a beat of silence, and then they were in hysterics. And then there they were. 4 kids from Earth, sitting around an old NASA probe, laughing at themselves. Their principal and old sci-fi movies. It didn't matter that they were on a 10,000-year-old spaceship, billions of miles from home. It was weirdly familiar, weirdly normal, and the closest to Earth any of them had felt in a long time. It was good. A week later, Revelation 2.0 was ready for unveiling. They had it set up on the bridge, and Pidge made a big show of covering it with a bedsheet and whipping it off in front of the 6 audience members, even though over half of them had helped her set it up. The new Revelation didn't look too much unlike the old one. It was still made of the shiny gold metal, now buffed out and polished. All its broken panels had been replaced, and its dish had been cleaned and straightened. The biggest differences came in the way of additions. Mingled along with metallic gold and grays of the human technology were portions of matte, white Altean tech, new dishes and scanners on the top, some additional panels and sensors on the base. It was an amalgamation of human and Altean engineering that, in Keith's opinion, was a pretty good visual metaphor for their hectic lives of late. It looks very interesting. Keith could tell Allura still didn't really understand why they had put so much effort into fixing it, but at least she was trying. How did the data retrieval go? Pidge pushed her glasses up to her nose. I found all the stuff I needed about the Galra ship that attacked Kerberos. There wasn't much, just a few encrypted communication records. But they'll be easy enough to sift through. Do you feel it will be worth the trouble it took to get it? Allura asked. Probably not, but that wasn't the only reason we wanted to check it out. Allura looked confused. I don't understand. Well, Pidge said, we're gonna send it out again. Wait, you're letting it go? Allura said, incredulous. After all this? That's what it's for, Allura, Hunk explained. You send probes out and they take pictures and send them back to you. It can go to places we, humans, can't, but still lets us explore them. We didn't think it was fair to just keep it around here gathering dust, Pidge said, patting the hull softly. That's not what we built Revelation for. It was designed to be the farthest deep space probe from Earth ever. It's really succeeded in that, huh? Lance said. Look how far this little dude has come. Pidge continued. So, I outfitted it with Altean communications and processing equipment, as well as new cameras and sensors. Now, we can send it out again. Let it keep doing its mission, and send what it finds back to Earth. Karan was riveted, but Allura looked now at least a little intrigued. The clear passion in the way they all spoke seemed to have swayed her, at least a little bit, to their cause. Shiro stepped in to explain further. No one on Earth has ever seen this far out in the universe, he said. Not in the detail Revelation will now allow. I know Altea was pretty advanced, so this might not seem important. But in the grand scheme of things, Earth is pretty new to space travel. This is going to be revolutionary. They're gonna lose their minds, Lance said. It's pretty limited, unfortunately, Hunk clarified. So we're not going to be able to send a message with it. But I think this is enough. Imagine what this will do for people back home, scientifically speaking. NASA is going to get so funded. Lance high-fived Pidge. So, Pidge said finally, posing the question at Allura and Karan. What do you think? There isn't much I can say, really, Allura said. I'm not from Earth, but I do think it's a nice sentiment. I think it's wonderful, Karan said. A novel idea. Really? Hunk said uncertainly. Yes, it's fascinating to see how much value humans seem to place in the simple act of exploration. It's quite charming, and a little scary. Karan laughed. To think you undertake such grand goals with such underdeveloped technology, clearly knowing how difficult it is. We do it not because it's easy, Keith said quietly, but because it's hard. He hadn't thought he said it loud enough for anyone to hear, but a second later Hunk was laughing next to him. He looked up and met Lance's eyes. Nerd, he said, but he was grinning. They dispersed, and preparations were started. Karan and Allura helped by compiling a short list of the places they thought might be the most interesting for Revelation to photograph, while Keith helped Pidge and Hunk prep the probe for relaunch. Okay, but we have to find a pretty place to drop it off, Keith heard Lance telling Allura behind him. My mom is going to see these pictures. I want them to be nice. Keith smiled.